Hey, Cut the Shit listeners. You can find every episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Go check us out. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Brian Link, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. Welcome back, everybody. Another episode of Cut the Shit After Hours. Brian has his obligatory After Hours uniform on, which is a hat.
Yes, it's a hat.
Although if you talk to anybody at Plow, they oftentimes have a hat on anyway because IT guys have bad hair. Yeah. That's just the way it is.
I don't think I have bad hair. I just want to wear a hat.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You know.
Maybe it's both.
Stereotype and generalize all.
It's a clean hat, I've been told.
I was only talking about our people. I wasn't necessarily talking about the IT people.
We stereotype and generalize all of our people.
Actually, some of them have outstanding
No one is
hair.
immune.
Yeah, Spencer has outstanding hair. It's true.
Spencer
very true. And Zach. Zach's got good hair. Yeah.
Houston's got some kind of crazy.
Houston's got a lot of flow. Yeah. So, and maybe it's just the old guys that have bad hair.
He does like the Teen Wolf thing.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. Before we dive into the meat of the discussion, and we do have the meat of the discussion, since that was funny.
Twice.
We got to start with the obvious. This is being released on Tuesday, October 31st, which is Halloween. So we're recording a little before that, a couple of days before.
Saints Day.
But we're going to pretend like it is Halloween.
Okay.
So before we get into the good stuff, depending on how you define
We've
that.
been doing this more than a year because we did a Halloween episode last year and there's spooky stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just now tuning in. What?
Welcome to the party.
Thanks. Good job.
This is what
They've
happens.
only done like
Good
60
job.
of these things at
Yeah.
this point. Maybe more. I slighted you at 60.
Yeah, we've done this a lot.
I
now.
felt like
Time or two.
that was an underhanded congratulations.
So-
I'm impressed.
We are going to start with a few Halloween-related questions for you.
Back
two
to the meat of
bozos.
things.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting back to the meat.
This is the most important thing. Best and worst Halloween costume you've ever worn. And Cameron, this is primarily for you since you wear costumes.
Mine's actually going to be pretty good.
You don't really need
Surprise.
Halloween to wear
I know
costumes,
yours.
but
That's awesome. Actually, I know two of yours that are awesome. Some of mine are not PG, and
well, that's fine. Yeah, we'll leave the inappropriate ones out. I have some of those too.
go. You
I don't know that I've ever had a
Best
bad
and
one.
worst?
Yeah,
Like a worse one.
because yours are always awesome.
No. I just
well, you
haven't
could
done
go
like-
back to like when you were a kid. Like,
I'm sure I did some stupid like.
I know I have one that stands out in a big way.
Underoos something. I'm sure there was an Underoos.
You wore your
outfit.
Do you remember
Underoos
those stupid
Yeah.
plastic masks that had like the little cut slit in? They
You couldn't
cut
breathe?
Your face.
Oh, yeah.
You had that stupid thing that pop you.
Pop
like,
you in the back
kids
behind the
don't
ears.
know what that's like
They don't.
nowadays.
Those are great, dude. They
They're
suck,
so
but they're
creepy.
great.
So creepy.
Yeah.
But,
All right,
yeah.
best costume, Cameron, go.
I didn't have any time to think about that. Like, let me think.
I'll go.
Brian,
my
go.
best are we did this group settings was 100% Kiss.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking.
It
of.
was the we had the
Money.
whole group of four covered, and
Did you get the Eric the Fox too,
Dude,
or
the
did you
boot-
just go with the
the
original
boots,
four?
the
we went the
whole
original
deal, yeah.
four.
Okay.
And
Way
Scott
to go
Spear,
obscure though. Yeah, nice
that was
job,
strong.
dude.
Scott literally thought, like, no shit, he thought he was Gene Simmons. He turned into Gene Simmons. Like, we went into the party because we had these friends
get the
that
tongue
put these
stretcher?
things together. I'll give you a shout out to
That's awesome.
Wesley and Courtney Haynes if you're tuned in.
crushed it.
And we walked in, there was smoke and everything, and he thought we had turned in. We drank a lot. He thought we had turned into Kiss, and all he wanted to do was go
post pictures within that.
the entire
Well,
night. I'm like,
I'll
stop
make
that
sure a
shit.
picture of this gets posted in the comments
Yeah.
because it
It's
is.
good.
He's not giving himself credit. Like, I've seen this thing. It is. If you could take it to 10, it went to 11. Like, I mean, it was legit.
Shoulder pads, old shoulder pads, converted into
Yep.
the outfit. The
Boots, the
boots.
boots.
Amy and Jana and Marla, they spent so much time. We had people at that party that had done professional makeup.
Wasn't as good.
It was not even close
Yeah.
to being as
It-
good.
it-
And the
credit
other
where
one,
credit's off.
the
It's
following
really
year
good.
was
Amy
Michael Jackson. Amy was Michael
Oh my
Jackson.
God, it's also
And we
good.
did the entire Thriller. We came in and they played it, and we did the entire Thriller dance, and there was about 30 of us, and it was also off the hook.
What was the worst one?
I don't know. I'm certain it was like some underoos or dressing up
Some
like a
dumb-
damn football player or something. I mean, what you do when
did-
you're young.
Probably my worst one was I got on this I like a costume. Like
No
I
kidding.
I just got a like one of those big like huge wheeled racks like you put clothes on.
Yeah.
That it's huge. It's like 12 feet long or whatever. But I just took all that over to storage the other day, and it's full. Like of nothing but costumes. But I just got I got in a kick where I bought vintage McDonald's uniforms from like the 70s, and I had this. If you remember, they had like stripes on the sleeves, and they're maroon, nasty polyester, like they were with the arches.
They had bad hats.
Yeah.
At one
So
point.
the full deal though, and I bought Catherine the yellow. The girls wore like those. Do you remember there was like a bird that was like Grimace and
it was a tweety little bird that was part of the
bird wore that same dress. Anyway, I got that too, but I wore that and I thought, you know what? I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to look like a guy that drives a van that's a creep that works at McDonald's. Like I made this whole character in my head and had this like Jeffrey Dahmer looking glasses and wig. And so it wasn't really. It was scary, but like at a guttural level, like this guy's
no, too much, too much.
Like nobody, like it wasn't funny, it wasn't scary, it was just weird.
Right.
And it like I found a picture of it the other day, which is why I'm thinking of it, and it's weird. I creeped myself out looking at it, so that was interesting. But my favorite one was one that I did for my son, who got into this obscure. He's not obscure, but this DJ named Deadmau5, and Deadmau5 has this like big head and all this kind of stuff, and so I built him the full head with like the LED face and the whole deal, and I ended up building him a smoke machine that he could wear on his back, like a fog machine, and I had full on lasers like clipped onto the backpack thing, but it weighed too much, so he would like. I ended up having to put like lacrosse pads on him and like a belt and stuff so he could carry it. But he
Cameron.
But he had like a speaker set up and everything. He would walk down the street and it was full on like a.
He's playing some tunes.
But it was pretty awesome. Like I would like to wear that thing.
I want it right now.
It's pretty cool. Like maybe I can find a picture of that we can throw it in the things. I'll even put the McDonald's picture in there for good measure, just so y'all can see how weirdly gross it is. So, Link.
I don't have a picture of my worst costume, but I remember it vividly. It was 6th grade, and I thought I had a great idea. And it wasn't a terrible idea, but the execution left a lot to be desired. I dressed up as a Conehead. So if you think back to that. And now in 6th grade, even in 6th grade, that was retro because it was from Saturday Night Live in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
So in 6th grade, it was the 80s.
Went on to be a movie, though.
Yes, it did. But for whatever reason, I couldn't figure out how to get flesh-colored materials to make the Conehead. So I guess I think I got my mom to help me, which was probably a mistake. I ended up with a green piece of large poster board that I turned into a cone to put on my head for being a Conehead. So it was green.
But you were not green.
No. And so it was. I just looked like a dunce.
A dunce.
I didn't look like a Conehead. I looked like a dunce.
Just a doofus.
And it was 6th grade where you're kind of. I liked girls, but I didn't really know. And it was kind of a dance.
Did that pull the ladies?
No, it was terrible. That's what I'm saying. It was terrible. That's why.
That's a bad one.
It's still a little scarring.
I know what you're wearing.
I wish I should have worn one of those plastic masks and a plastic costume from like back in the day. Best costume is probably something I can't talk about on this particular podcast. So I'll go to the second option. Leanne and I went to a Halloween party, kind of like what you're talking about, for a number of years with friends, and it was intense, in terms of costumes. And we dressed up as Posh and Bex.
That's pretty good.
I had the tattoos nailed, the good outfit,
nice.
And I've got pictures, so I can contribute that to the cause.
Posh Spice and David Becker.
Yes,
correct.
Correct.
Along the same topics, I used to go to this party in Nashville called Anything Goes, and it's this elaborate costume party that really just goes over the top. I mean, people send it to the next level, and so we've done some crazy things. Like Matt Musser, if you're listening, this goes a shout out to you. I did a very complex theme one year that was 1994 country music fanfare, and the whole thing was a ruse to get them to dress Matt Musser up like Winona Judd and full professional makeup. It's awesome. It's one of my favorite things. But somebody texted me pictures of it last night, and they're like, "Do you remember this?" And it was her husband had on a bald wig because he's supposed to look like he was 80-something years old, and he had gotten spray tanned with the like the bald whatever you call it thing. But he took it off that night, and so she said she woke up in the morning to this, and she sent me a picture of this strange. I don't know the guy, but he's asleep on the pillow with a dark face and a completely white forehead up.
He was bald. That's
it's so gross and disgusting. Like maybe I can blur his face out and put that out in the comments. But all right.
That was our Halloween bit.
I loved it.
Always fun. Let's get to the main event,
So
or at least
spooky.
the business. That's maybe the main event. I'm not sure.
People
but
don't tune into this.
We do
for
want to talk a
business.
little bit about IT cost optimization and kind of budgeting, right? Since we're in the fourth quarter now. I spent a little
Always
bit of time.
October.
I spent a little bit of time talking about it on the solo podcast, but I wanted to kind of get you guys to chime in a bit and get some perspectives on a couple of things. So, again, it's the fourth quarter. 2024 is around the corner, which
Crazy.
is hard to believe, like it always is. So it's time to think about next year.
I'm still trying to get Q1 goals.
Yeah, well, no
published,
kidding.
Like of 23. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Always looking forward,
Yeah,
Cameron.
right.
Always looking
Yeah,
forward.
exactly.
You can just bring them back
Yeah,
up.
that's what we'll do.
They won't go away. Even the idea of the expression IT cost optimization, when you hear that or you think about that, what comes to mind? How do you sort of think about that in your own heads?
How do I think it
Yeah,
should
well, I
be,
mean,
or
yeah,
how do I
for
think
sure.
it's typically carried out?
Well, let's start with the optimistic side, how it ought to be, and then we can think about how it actually happens.
Using empirical data.
What does that
in
mean?
Analysis. I think.
Give us some more specifics.
I think a lot of people make decisions off of conjecture, and they look for the low-hanging fruit and just kind of the obvious things, like, oh, we'll trim this expense by eliminating it, or not looking through and determining, was that a necessary expense? What was the point and purpose of that originally? Is that there for a reason? We just had lunch with a guy that said that he probably has 1,800 users that are using the wrong license that costs
And he knows it.
5-6 times what the proper license probably costs, but it's just a convenience thing. I mean, I'm not going to rat who that guy out is because he's a bright guy. He knows it.
Well, no, I mean that can happen. That has nothing to do with like. It's an easy mistake to make. Sometimes these things accumulate over time.
Well,
too,
they
right?
do.
And oftentimes you get locked into
nickels.
things where you can't get out of it. Right? We've talked about that before.
It happens a lot. So, but I think the lack of data that supports the decision that you're defining what is you're trying to accomplish and what supports that, and does it matter? Like people have stuff that they think they need that they never use, right? They're not using that's in support of a strategic or a proper objective. That's one. But then within that, having good data that supports your decision, that says, for example, a lot of people have like maybe a gig circuit. I'm making stuff up here, but a gig circuit, and they pay, whatever they pay, $1,000 a month for it, and realize they're only using 100 meg of it at its peak. Like, do you need that? Why do you still have that? That's the type of data-driven optimization, or like what we've done with this. There's a shout out plug to our team and the intellectual property we've created, but our optimization tool that we have for Office 365 or for CSP, like Microsoft licenses, phenomenal. It gives you clear, actionable data. It's not a lot of legwork. If you're making decisions around licensing without that type of data at hand, that's the kind of optimization that isn't getting done. Like you should, and it's supportive. Like people look at these license spends as it's IT's problem. IT spent that money. If you're, in leadership in IT, and you can take that type of data back to let's just say the departmental heads and say, today you're consuming a $30 a month license, and making numbers up here. You could be spending a $10 a month instead. That's not IT's money. Like that, somebody else is making a collective decision to tell IT how to spend the money. That reflects poorly on IT. They just didn't have the data before they could present. So the point is getting good data that's in support of what it is you're trying to do and accomplish, not just these arbitrary sort of conjecture based. These are big decisions. I mean, there's 6 figures at stake in a lot of instances here. So that's what I mean by that. You asked me what time it was. I told you how to build a watch. Sorry.
To your point, I think it becomes when there's not data, it becomes a witch hunt. Right?
Yeah,
When it's just like conjecture and it's
you're just looking for something to support
find something to cut, right? And
or pet projects or power, right?
Yeah.
There's don't touch my stuff, and you can get away with that, even though they're. Because you don't know. I don't think anybody wants to spend money that they don't need to. Right?
I agree with that. I think a lot of times too, they don't know what they're getting into. Meaning, I want to get into this optimization initiative, but you at the same time go, we've got these other strategic initiatives that are not quite as tactical as cost savings, and they may have a greater perceived value. So I don't want to open up this can of worms. It's going to take 3 months of analytics and all this crap to maybe arrive at nothing when I need my people focused on something else.
Right.
That's where people like us come in. We can do that for you. It's much easier. But that's my ad.
It does link to a related question to that I had, which is when you think about what you just described, right? Optimization. We're using optimization in this case really kind of as a proxy for cost savings, right? We're assuming optimization means overspending of some sort. It might not. You could make an argument that optimization might actually mean spending more money eventually, where you look at it and be like,
more output optimization.
We've got less than we need. That's certainly possible. But generally, we think of it as cost savings. So it seems to me that trying to link that up with a repurposing of those dollars, maybe in the service of some strategic initiatives, is the way to solve the problem. Just curious thoughts on that.
I think that hits a level of, granted, everything we're talking about is relatively simple and straight line, especially in the rear view or on paper. But it becomes this sort of cubed up, complicated thing where we have enough trouble keeping up with one thing, let alone like, well, I'm going to do this to save this money to properly repurpose it for that. And so that stuff gets lost, I think, in the soup a lot of times, and it never gets seen to fruition. I mean, one thing IT does a piss poor job of, in my opinion, is stating what the outcome is supposed to be and actually following through and validating that it actually delivered. People lose interest. It's it's nerdy stuff. They get lost. Stuff changes. I mean, so, and I think everybody that's had any success in this business usually attempts to do that, but they rarely follow through and execute. I mean, people in our position should be doing it better too. I mean,
well, we're going to talk some
hold
about
these vendors to that.
Yeah, we're going to talk some about that. But I do think the gap, what you just one thing you just mentioned, I think is important, is that gap between deciding you want to do something and then what does it take to get to that outcome.
Yeah,
like that's half the problem, right? Or the challenge, because
inaction's the biggest enemy.
There's an opportunity cost associated with that.
Correct.
To
get there.
That can get gargantuan. Like,
well, you know what? I think a lot of times it's the fear of what you don't know. If I went in, like we just had this conversation with a prospective client, is that
exactly what I'm thinking about?
Yeah,
as far as him.
Yeah, he's thinking, my God, I know there's money in there. I need to do this, but he's thinking this is going to be a 3-month endeavor that's going to take a lot of my time, my people's time, whatever.
Which means I'm not doing something else.
Yes,
other things that I already
correct.
want
So
to do.
it becomes a complicated valuation exercise
associated with all of that.
That's right.
And so, but he's also assuming that we can't do it quick and easy and come up with a meaningful data-driven outcome. And we can, but he's just not, he doesn't know that.
There's no reason for him to think that it could be quick and easy.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. Nobody knows the difference.
Nobody knows,
but yeah, that's a thing.
And I was just going to say one other thing. It's how we get there is typically an easy path out, right? It's why do you pick E3 licenses? Because they kind of cover everybody.
Yeah, it's
just easy.
One and done
why do you
easy.
choose the 1 gig circuit? Because the telco rep said we're having a deal and it's only $500.
Yeah, so that seems reasonable.
It doesn't matter that the 100 meg is $200.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and spend the $300 because I might
just in case.
1 gig.
Yeah, right.
Well,
and it's such a great deal.
It's
right?
very
it's
similar
to
to you need to spend the extra money for the long range Tesla when, truth be told, you drive 30 miles a day. Like, give me a break.
Well, or it's it's how if you own a house for 20 years, you end up with your attic full of stuff because it's like, I might need it. Right? I keep it. Why not?
You buy a bigger house to hold more stuff.
It's not that big a deal to do that, and then cumulatively it ends up, being a problem.
Yeah, and you got to stay on top of it. I mean, we're going to beat this dead horse on our lunch, but you make circuit decisions, right? And
this guy's got 530 circuits.
530. 3 years later, you might have made the best choice at every single one of those locations. But guess what? There's new choices now, and if you're not on top of that stuff, you don't know. Nobody's living like that. Yeah. They solved it already. So now we're going to move on. You can save $200 a location, maybe.
Yeah,
and that adds up.
It does. I mean, we've got a lot of success stories there. The one thing that's interesting, if you look over the years about, I'm asking a question and I'm giving you an answer that you haven't asked, but here goes. If you look at,
I stopped you before.
Yeah, I was going to say his job and your job. So.
You got to at least swing over like this.
I'm just here to look pretty. It's fine.
Hey, I got a question for you.
You guys can ask each other questions.
If you look at the IT budgeting process now versus what it was, let's say, 5 years ago, like the proliferation of subscription-based services and cloud has made it immensely more, immensely less finite, right? And it's the same thing as you have at your house with, like, I'm sure you have a YouTube TV and a Hulu and a whatever else subscription, and these little nickels and dimes keep adding up. It's just convenience. You forget about them, whatever. That's happening at on such a broad scale basis, with everybody having all of a sudden purchasing authority and power. Everybody in this place, I think, probably even at Plow, could go out today and spin up some sort of a VM or a resource or something in the cloud without really any oversight or a collective sort of a decision authority. That's happening across the spectrum with all of our clients. And so without controls, then you can't properly budget, because those expenses could inevitably run on and just mushroom, as they often do. So if you look at a lot of our clients, what they were spending in Azure, even those that made no decisions to, strategically move workloads or payloads to Azure, their Azure bills have gone from $600 to $6,000, and nobody's done a project to enable that. Right. So what's happening there? And that's happening at scale. There's so much waste and so much expense going out the door. The same thing with licenses and everything else.
IT in general has not been a consumption-based business.
Historically, not.
Right? And so I think in many ways it's sort of ill-suited business from the business perspective to think of it that
doesn't
way.
have natural control.
It doesn't mean there's not plenty of opportunities there for that to be beneficial, obviously, right? I mean, fixed costs come with their own sets of problems, right? But so do variable costs, right? And I think recognizing that is
I think a lot of cloud consumption should not
solution.
A lot of the cloud consumption should not be, in my opinion, considered variable cost. There are certain metered elements to it that are going to have some swing, but it should be within a maybe a 10. I'm picking that number out of my rear, but 10%, right? It shouldn't be. We went from $6,000 to $60,000 over the course of 12 months.
No, of course,
unexpectedly. But without controls in place, there's nothing that's preventing that from happening either. And a lot of people are, inking 12-month deals where they realize they're not with the click of a button when they hit subscribe to something, and off that goes, and that stuff is stacking up to be significant. Significant in terms of annual budget creep, if you will. So anyway, it's more difficult than it's ever been.
Sure. And we talked, you mentioned it, you gave a little shameless plug for our optimization tool. But I mean, if you're sitting on the other side of the table as a client or a buyer, what should you be asking your vendors and suppliers to do for you as it relates to your trying to either figure out optimization or even budgeting, thinking about the next year?
Personally, I think it's, we sit in an interesting position with a lot of our clients, and it's not one they maybe invite us to be in, but I feel there's an immense amount of responsibility that we should take, because we're in the catbird seat to see things trending, to see things in the industry, to even see things within a specific account. If we don't, and I'm almost speaking exclusively to consumption-based, metered services, et cetera. If we don't know what their budgets are or what the plan is or what their expectations are, then I think we're doing both ourselves and that client a disservice, because there are very simple things you can do to kind of set early indicators that things are about to get out of hand. There should be a consistent and ongoing check-in, and we find this a lot when we inherit or take over service lines from competitors, where you get in there and you run an optimization. Now, granted, we've got some cool tools that do some things that I think are unique to Plow, but even in the absence of those, we always seem to find something, and a lot of somethings in most cases. And I think you end up in situations where we always end up asking ourselves, who the hell was who was asleep at the wheel on this? Did they not talk to you about this before it got here? And, I'm sure we're guilty of it. I mean, I'm not saying we're immune to this, but, you get 3 years into something, or let's say 30 months into the 3-year deal, and you're like, God, this thing ran on and went crazy the whole time. And it was left unchecked. And I think the vendor community has a responsibility not to waste the customer's money. Otherwise, you end up with short-term clients, and you play the long game here, right? But and I think customers should expect that from their vendors too. Frankly, I mean, I don't expect every one of our clients to be on top of their game at all times with everything. There's a lot to know. They got to know their business on top of our business.
Sure. So you think the vendors
are to blame,
are responsible?
I think
to come in and to do some kind of assessment or eval.
I'm going to say I'm 90% feeling that way. I think it's unnatural to expect the vendor to have responsibility to police their own. That'd be like. Me bitching at Netflix for my kid buying 2 extra movies. It's not their fault, right? It's not Netflix's fault. But in this situation where we have such an integral relationship to the delivery and operations of the client, and the fact that every dollar is a dollar they could spend on something else with us too, I think it's up to the vendors. They're spending enough money. It should be on us to do it right, because we know stuff about it they don't know. We have optics and insight and sort of vantage points that, no matter what they think, they don't have that we have. And so I think we do have a responsibility to stay on top of it for them, at least to put them in a position of knowledge. Whether they take action on it or not, it's another story, but they should at least be made aware from our side.
I feel like that's kind of our MO though.
That's how we do things.
It all started from the very beginning. It was
That's correct.
Always about how can we find money, right? How can we find spent money?
That's useless money.
And recover it and repurpose it and put it in. Give
Something
you the
that matters.
opportunity to either put it to the bottom line or put it into something that's, the business actually needs. I asked the question because I don't feel like that's. I'm not trying to like hold us up. I don't feel like other people feel responsible to come in there and
Probably
do that.
not.
I think some of it's just how we operate.
There's truth to that, but I think as customers, you should demand that.
Yeah,
You should
I was looking
expect
at. Forget about what the vendors
Yeah.
want to do or how they operate. I'm looking at it more as if you're sitting in the seat of a buyer. These are the things you should ask, and I think, frankly, expect. And if they can't do it or are unwilling to do it, then you probably ought to think about getting a new
Did you
new
expect
vendor.
it?
Yeah, you guys
did?
did a pretty good job of.
But did you expect it though? Like,
Well,
you
I
going
didn't.
trying
I
to
didn't know
recommend
what.
seat?
I didn't really know what to expect.
For
Looking
those who know
back on-
that, Brian Link was a client of ours before
Yeah.
he worked with us.
and
So-
was the definition of an accidental CIO. So I didn't really know what I should expect.
Yeah.
But as it went along, right? So we get into year one, and we're still trying to figure out how to unscrew up the problems that were already there. Once we started to get past that, then it was like, okay, well, I could at least think about. I got to the point where, I mean, early on it was firefighting. Like I couldn't. The thought about planning for the next year wasn't even in my mind.
Yeah.
But once I got to that point, then I started thinking like, okay, well, we're spending X. We know we've got we got net new spend for current stuff coming on. And oh, by the way, had now figured out like we have other potential problems to solve. So there was conversations and there was thinking in my head like, well, maybe they can help me figure out like how to make sure we're not spending too much on our circuits because I could use that extra money to up, we got some other things we could spend those dollars on. It started off pretty hazy, but it was there. And to your point, there wasn't that much consumption-based stuff. Now that you're in the consumption-based world, you should expect that.
Yeah.
I mean, because to your
That's
point
a good
about,
point.
I'll give you an example of Netflix.
That changes.
I think the idea of Netflix, I'd be more interested in a longer term relationship with Netflix if they gave me better data about how I use the service.
Sure, that's what people.
What it's
people
in
are
there
just in
to
the
me.
dark.
You can argue like maybe someone inside Netflix could easily say, well, yeah, if we do that, a bunch of customers are gonna cancel because they're gonna see they're not using the service. Maybe that's true,
But the ones that don't.
but the ones that don't are going to stay.
Forever.
The lifetime customer value just keeps getting better.
That's the
So
problem.
that's the part that I do actually think there's an alignment there. It just may not seem like
so
it
the
on its
construct
face.
of lifetime customer value is something that I think has faded quite a bit in the last maybe 10 years. Like, and I don't know if it's the generation of sellers. I don't know if it's just this I only work places for 2 or 3 years. Who cares? I'm going to the next quota, whatever it is.
Technology advancements.
Yeah. So all that stuff has pushed that notion of investing. Like look, you as a client invested in us. We as a provider invested in you, and there's give and take and all that. And over the years, the relationship worked, and then we stole you away from them and screwed them over, and now you work with us. But you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
like
of course.
There's a value.
They were happy to give me to you.
They were. Listen, there was a dope deal there. I'm kidding. There's a value to those long-term relationships that does infer that level of responsibility that I'm talking about. That is, I don't think expected because people aren't not used to it on the consumption side or the provider side.
Yeah.
But it ought to be there, especially when you're doing stuff that has wild variability like metered and consumption-based services.
Yeah.
So
I've got one more sort of question this, and it relates to even a comment earlier on around low-hanging fruit, which got used in kind of a negative sense. But I do think it's, as you think about sort of experience of talking to clients over the years, and we're in this sort of period of time, where if you were going to talk to a CIO and you didn't know anything about their company, and they said, where do you think I ought to take a look for potential optimization opportunities? Where would you tell them to look? What would be the areas? I know that's a loaded question because you don't know enough about their environment. But
I was going to say, first of all, I wouldn't start talking. I'd listen. But
well, he's asked you a question, so you have to.
now I'm just going to be a jerk if I sit there and stare at.
Yeah, you can't
Gun to
just
your
say,
head.
well, don't give him
I'm
the
gonna
well.
let you go first. I've been running my mouth.
Don't give him the well. It
I
depends.
got an answer.
I would definitely point them in the direction of subscription-based services first, and then telco, just because we know it exists.
Right.
I mean, we'd have to know a little bit more about the company on the
For
telco
sure,
side
telecom.
as it relates to number of locations and things like
Sure.
that.
Yeah, assuming in our footprint, multi-location, enough for it to be complex and
100%.
not have a good feel for it.
Subscription
Same with
services.
subscription services.
Maintenance, warranties on like the hardware,
Right.
the telco piece for sure.
renewals. What are there any renewals
Everything.
coming up? Making
Yeah.
sure that you're square on those, right?
The big killers to budgets are unexpected end of life equipment and that sort of thing. Or am I paying so much for maintenance that I should self spare? Or there's a lot of that stuff that requires, I think, people with some experience to call it out, and then you can arm them someday and they can make good decisions. The place. I forgot the place I was going to say. You were talking about telecom and licensing. Those are table stakes. Those are easy to go after always. Tools.
Yeah.
The bigger the IT department is and the more diverse technologies you have at play, I swear to you, there's gold sitting in unused tools. Everybody needs a special tool. Everybody needs another special tool. This stuff becomes shelfware. It's not exactly implemented, or, they didn't define on the front end. Like I call this out all the time. What are we spending money on? What is it for? What do we expect out of it? How do we know if that was successful? Those questions, A, don't get asked, or B, they get BS'd and they get thrown on a piece of paper and nobody looks at them again. But a lot of these tools, I've seen people spend more money on the tool than what the damn value of the service that it's supporting is in the end. And it happens all the time. It's like people being overinsured. It's like, stop buying tools.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, if you look at it, in many cases, we can eloquently prove that outsourcing the service is cheaper than the damn tool itself, let alone the guys running it. Sure. So there's always shelfware that's sitting in the bigger IT shop. I'm not talking small, but in a mid-sized organization where you've had somebody who's a nerd about some specific thing, I guarantee you they bought a tool that's not being used.
Yeah, you got shelfware, and then I'd say duplication, particularly around subscriptions. And the simplest example, right, is Microsoft 365. If you're a shop that's got, most of your folks on some sort of a broader subscription, E, maybe even an F, right? You've got that's giving you a bunch of tools, right?
Overlap, security.
And so then are you buying Slack? Are you buying, some sort of web you've got a professional Zoom subscription. You've also got, Dropbox. You've got all these things
Sprawl.
And this is where you get into, people that are heavy duty or sort of
power users or
desperate around a certain kind of solution, but those are fairly close substitutes for each other, right? Teams chat and Slack. I mean, I'm not going to get in an argument. There are people who think Slack is just the greatest thing in the planet, and that's fine. And if you've got a big investment in it and you've built up all kinds of stuff, I guess that's okay. But from a financial perspective, it's hard to make the argument that you should have both. It just is.
There's a reason. There's a reason Teams took off. There's a reason that Active Directory became a thing. Like, arguably, in my opinion, there are better services out there, but it's included, so you can't. Like, it
does the job right?
Effective?
It's doing the job that it's supposed to do. Right?
Correct.
Is it perfect? Does it do everything? No.
So what?
But it's already there, and you're already paying.
Correct.
That's the kind of what we're talking about.
That's the genius of the bundle.
It is.
But
it is.
As on the seller
well,
side.
as we're seeing we mentioned Netflix in the great unbundling. I think what all of us have figured out is we thought this was going to be cheaper.
Yeah.
And it's not.
It's not.
The old cable bundle is actually cheaper than what it costs to buy the subscriptions.
By the time you have them all.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now if you're like most people, you don't have everything that you used to have, and you're paying roughly the same, if not a little more. And every now and then you're frustrated because you're like, well, I don't have that thing over there.
So, you talk about budgeting. The one thing I don't see people put in their budget is the expense of actual optimization, which would in turn, or in theory, be an investment because it should return some dividends.
Now, are you talking sort of like the opportunity cost, the time, or the spend to get there?
Whatever you feel compelled to throw into that. But the point is, they won't spend money to save money.
Yeah.
It typically doesn't happen. So you typically, in our position, you have to find the money to give a gift in order to make the return on that.
Right. Back to the repurposing question.
Correct.
A lot of times that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. But, I think there's a lack of, or there's an assumption that if you trim the fat, then, maybe that fat was important. So, we're going to feel it. We're going to feel some pain. You look at the tool set, I'm going to go back to that. I'm sorry, just because it's fresh in my mind. It's something I'm impressed with. But our tool set does a number of analytics that, or what if scenarios that aren't just specifically within, like, for example, that CSP or Microsoft tool stack, right? It's looking at other edge gateway services. I'll leave them nameless. But, you might, with a very small add-on to an existing Microsoft licensing package, be able to replace the guy we were talking to spends $500,000 a year on essentially a redundant service. So he could spend $40,000 instead as an additive license and accomplish the same thing. Yeah. So it's complicated though. I mean, these CIOs can't be expected to know everything about everything all the time. So that's where I go back to. I think it's we have some responsibility as a supply chain to correct.
I think so too. And I think if there's a partnership concept between, I use the term vendor or supplier sort of loosely, right? Because that just assumes you're just fulfilling some need that's
Yeah.
clearly defined, and you're just kind of providing that across the table. And that, I mean, we do that in certain instances, and there's lots of that in the industry. That's not really a partnership though, right? And what we're talking about, because to your point earlier, if it's not a partner implies some trust, right? So let's kind of put that up front. Without the trust, how are you going to ask a vendor or supplier to come in and
That was kind of my point.
help you optimize,
Right.
right? Because you're like, I don't trust them.
don't trust these guys.
They just want to get paid,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, and look, everybody wants to get paid. It's kind of like everybody who works at a company. Well, yeah, they want their check to clear every 2 weeks. That's not the only reason that they show up, and it's also not it's not the only the only reason you do something. But that implies the trust with the employee that they actually care about what you're trying to do, maybe more broadly than just getting to the next paycheck.
Correct.
I think the same applies to these relationships. If you don't have that on both sides of the table, there's not enough trust to make it work.
Well, there's a fair amount of the buying population out there that has never experienced partnership. I mean,
for sure.
frankly, and so
No question.
I think if we're
It sounds
selling,
by their choice too.
that's true. There are some people that are just
they
that
make a
way.
decision that we're going to control.
Yeah, and that's typically procurement and large scale enterprise.
Yeah.
One, it assumes
Procurement.
it assumes commodity that you know very clearly what
I got to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, and the bottom line, if it's just paper towels and they're exactly the same, I mean, you probably want to
I get
spend
it.
20 instead of 25 cents a piece, right? I mean,
Yeah.
duh.
I think
but that's
one
not
of the
what we're talking about.
I think one of the ones we miss is personnel too. We don't see it as much in our space because our space is typically under-resourced and kind of restricted. But there are shops. I mean, again, we're having this conversation going from 75 to 48 and not missing a beat. I mean, back to less is more sometimes, and I think that's a real thing in certain shops
For sure.
And those ratios
that may not be less is more. That's certainly more wasn't more.
Yeah, true.
So that's no question about that.
I'm just gonna let you go on the next question.
All right. Well, that's. I mean, I guess kind of wrap it up and
Look at
say,
me. He's the host.
you don't look at him. To wrap it up, as if you could leave the listeners with some sort of piece of advice as they head into 2024, again, as it relates to working with partners, right, or vendors / suppliers and partners, that's what we're striving to be. I think most people in our space probably are striving to be, whether they're getting there or not. That's debatable. But what would be some advice you would give? And I guess maybe think about it like if we had 3 clients sitting over there across the table and they were asking the same question, what would you tell them? Not just about Plow, but about their broader relationships.
At a broad level, I would say I would encourage them to go through a process to make a decision as to whether or not they want a partner, to find as someone they can trust and they can feel like they can sit on the same side of the table with and go do life together, or they just want a vendor or supplier.
Yeah,
I think that's a great starting point because
might be, and there may be both.
There could be a combination.
There could be. You could need partners for certain aspects of what you do, and maybe vendors for others. If it's real clear and simple, you know exactly what it is. And you just need a plug and play. I mean, I don't have a problem with that concept.
Yeah, might as well procure it through your partner, though. You might as well keep them tight.
Well, but then you can give your partner the same instructions, which is, look, I want to see those because let's keep this price. I want the price low on that because it's just a solution. It's just a plug.
Fair enough.
I would argue, and it's along those same lines, but take inventory of how much time you're spending dorking with and managing partners, vendors, whatever you call it, because this industry is designed by its very nature to wag the dog, and the dog being the customer. Right. And I know of people in this business that if there's 40 hours in a work week, I swear to you, they're spending 32 of them dorking around with managing partners and managing vendors, cultivating those relationships and whatever else. We don't talk to, I say we don't, like, if a customer is spending that much time talking to people in our position, arguably, are they getting anything done? I mean, IT at the end of the day is table stakes. There's not just a tremendous amount of sea change innovation taking place out of our businesses that are just revolutionizing industry. That's not true. I don't.
Yeah, we're not talking about application creation. Or
people can say that, but they're full of shit. That's not what's happening in most cases. What are you doing in your role that requires that level of oversight and management involvement. And you know,
that's the falling in love with the best of breed, right? And assuming there's no friction to having, 8 different sources of solutions for 8 different problems, right?
Yeah.
Which we all know that's way more than 1 or 2.
Well, it should be choose the menu, pick the provider, get it done, hold them accountable to the SLA deliveries and everything else, SLA back deliveries of what it is you expect. Assume that what you chose was correct. You shouldn't have to talk to them that much at that point. It's either working or it's not.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of people doing that stuff, and I think that my one bit of advice if somebody are sitting here is be like, I hope that we're not in the news, and I hope you're not in the news with us, and I hope this is exactly what you set out. And if it's not, set out to accomplish. If it's not, say something. We'll fix it. We'll set it, or we'll part ways, and that's the end of it. And other than that, I'd rather hang out with you and have a beer than talk shop.
Yeah.
So let's.
Yeah, I guess my piece of
hold us to a higher
advice
standard.
would be make sure before you even start, make sure that you're well calibrated with the business side of the business. Like,
100%.
is
For
what
sure.
you're doing. Do you
That's
have
what matters.
Do you have a very good idea of where you guys are trying to go over the next 12, 24, 36
I failed to make
months?
that point, but that was at the root of what I was trying
Yeah,
to say.
yeah. For
If
sure.
You're spending all that time. You're not spending that time working on the business. You're
Yeah,
spending
because
that time
that's,
working
at the end of the day, that's all this is about, right?
Yeah.
This is, we joke about it all the time, but it's this, we're the offensive line, right? We don't make plays. We help facilitate the making of
Yes,
plays.
that's correct.
And that's true for the internal IT shop as well. So make sure you understand that, which means what the plays the quarterback's calling, right?
Well, on the supplier side, I will say this: your point's perfectly stated there with the offensive line. And you know what? We are just an extension of that same offensive line. We all have the same job to do here. And so if you're thinking of us as a supplier in it rather than a partner in it, arguably, I don't know that you're going to get the best out of all of us. We're there to do the same job, and the end of the day, that's to serve that business,
That's right.
not serve that IT department. So
That's right. Well, on that note, since we'll let the people get back to doing what they're doing. Hopefully, they'll finish their workday if they're listening to this in the morning or in the afternoon on the way home. They're getting ready to either go trick or treating with themselves. That maybe be a little weird since most of the people who listen to this are adults, probably with their children, or they're handing out candy. As always, we appreciate you guys listening, putting up with our nonsense. After Hours is always fun. Brian Cameron, thanks again.
You're welcome.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Glad to be here.
Happy
See you
Halloween.
guys.
Thanks.
Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok @CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.